Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Try Not to Sleep. I'm your host, Ethan Brooks. And as always, we're here with another calm, slightly boring story from history to help you unwind. Tonight, we'll be talking about the curious case of the so-called Roswell alien interview and the strange idea that your soul has supposedly visited this planet thousands of times before. All right, get comfortable. And let's see how far you make it before you fall asleep. Lawrence Spencer never expected to find a mystery in his mailbox. But that's exactly what happened. One thick envelope, no return address, just stuffed with yellowed military documents from the 1940s. Now, most people would see a stack of old memos and duty rosters from Roswell Army Airfield and shrug. Routine stuff, right? Just another piece of the endless paper trail left behind by the military machine. Except, here's the thing. Buried in those pages was something that didn't fit. There were transcripts. Allegedly, they were interviews with a nurse named Matilda MacElroy, who claimed she'd communicated telepathically with a captured alien. Not just any alien either, one who talked about a secret war, humanity's true origins, and a cosmic prison system. So, what's going on here? Mainstream historians say these are just fakes. They argue that military documents from that era are usually mundane, and any wild claims about telepathic aliens are just science fiction dressed up as fact. But then you have the anomaly, the details in the transcripts. There's talk of computers in 1947, a word barely used outside of classified labs until the 1960s. There's also the use of the European date format, not standard for American military paperwork. That's weird. And then there's the alternative. What if these documents weren't just routine? What if they were a cover for something bigger? Something the government didn't want anyone to see? Here's a credibility anchor. Spencer claimed he didn't write the transcripts, only edited them. He said he destroyed the originals out of fear, but not before copying every word. Reality check. Critics say there's zero corroborating evidence for any of it. No one else ever saw the documents, and Spencer's story relies entirely on his own word. That's a fair point, but it doesn't explain the specific historical oddities, like the anachronistic language and formatting. So, who was Matilda? Was she even real? And if she was, why did her story vanish? Except for this one mysterious envelope. So, why would a story like Matilda's disappear? Except for a handful of papers that just show up out of nowhere. Let's look at those documents. On the surface, they're classic 1940s military paperwork. There are duty rosters, schedules, and memos from Roswell Army Airfield. Exactly what you'd expect from a base at the center of UFO lore. The mainstream view? These are just leftovers from a busy post-war outpost. But then, buried in the stack, things get weird. There are transcript pages. They describe interviews with a being called Errol, not a human, but an Isbi, or immortal spiritual being. The language is dry, almost clinical, but the content is anything but. Errol talks about alien civilizations, mind control, and a prison planet Earth. Except, none of this fits the era. The transcripts use words like computer and interface, terms that had barely entered public vocabulary in 1947. Then there's the date format, European style, day before month, which was not standard for U.S. military documents at the time. That's not just a typo. So, What's the alternative explanation? Maybe these aren't authentic at all. Maybe someone in the 2000s forged them, using modern language and formatting by mistake. But here's a credibility anchor. Spencer claimed he didn't write the transcripts, only edited them. He said he got the envelope in 27 and destroyed the originals out of fear. Hardly the actions of someone seeking fame. Now, reality check. Skeptics argue there's no proof these documents are real. No chain of custody, no second witness, nothing verifiable. That's a strong objection, but it doesn't explain the odd mix of authentic military jargon and out-of-place technical terms. Details that are hard to fake without deep research. So if these papers really came from the 1940s, who wrote them? And if they didn't, why go to such lengths to make them look real? Someone wanted this story told. But who? And why now? The envelope didn't just contain documents. There was a letter, unsigned, typed on plain paper. The message was short. You need to know the truth. The world is not what it seems. That's not your average crank mail. Mainstream thinking says anonymous tips are usually hoaxes or attention grabs. But this letter didn't ask for money, fame, or even a reply. It just dropped a bombshell and disappeared. So, what did the stranger want Spencer to believe? Inside the transcripts, Matilda describes telepathic conversations with Errol, the alien. Errol claims Earth is a prison, run by an ancient, old empire that uses mind control and memory wipes to keep souls trapped. No escape, no memories of past lives, just endless reincarnation. That's a wild claim, except it's not totally new. What? The idea of Earth as a prison planet pops up in old myths, religions, and even science fiction. But here, it's presented as military intelligence. Recorded, typed, and filed. Now here's the twist. Errol supposedly predicted a coming secret war and hinted at the true origins of humanity. The language is clinical, but the content reads like a manifesto. So, is this a warning? A coded message? Or just a story someone wanted to believe? There's a credibility anchor. The Oz Factors, a book Matilda supposedly read before choosing Spencer as her confidant, mixes fiction and real UFO testimony. It's been cited by actual UFO researchers, like Stanton Friedman, for its blend of fact and speculation. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no evidence Matilda ever existed, and no proof these interviews happened. That's a big hole. But the detail and consistency in the transcripts make it hard to dismiss as pure invention. So, who sent the envelope? Was it a whistleblower, a prankster, or someone with their own agenda? And if the message is real, what exactly are we supposed to do with it? So, what was really happening at Roswell in 1947? Most people picture flying saucers and cover-ups. But the daily reality was a lot duller. The base ran on strict schedules, maintenance checks, training flights, piles of paperwork. The mainstream view says the Roswell Army airfield was just another cog in the post-war military machine. But then, there's the anomaly. Hidden among the routine memos and rosters, the transcripts described something else entirely. A nurse, Matilda, allegedly pulled into a secret interview with a non-human entity. No witnesses, no official records, just her word, and these mysterious pages. So why would a base obsessed with order and secrecy leave behind evidence of something this bizarre? One alternative is that these documents are clever forgeries, slipped in with real paperwork to make them look authentic. The language is a strange mix, military jargon side by side, with terms like interface and computer, decades before those words became common. Except some details line up with what we know. For example, the Roswell base really did have classified operations and tight security, and the format of some memos matches what archivists have seen from that era. But then you hit the weird stuff. European date formats, references to technology that didn't exist yet, and the story itself, an alien warning about a cosmic prism. Here's the thing. If this was just a prank, it was an elaborate one. But if it's real, then someone at Roswell was documenting something far stranger than weather balloons. Credibility anchor. The base logs from Roswell in July 1947 do show a sudden spike in restricted activity according to declassified Air Force reports. But nothing officially mentions aliens or telepathy. Reality check. The strongest objection is that no other personnel ever reported anything like this, and the U.S. military is for record keeping. Still, the lack of official acknowledgement doesn't prove the story is false. Just that if it happened, it was buried deep. So, was Roswell's routine just a cover for something extraordinary? Or are we seeing the clever fingerprints of a storyteller who knew just how to blur the line between fact and fiction? Here's where things get even stranger. If you dig into the envelope Spencer received, you'll find what looks like a standard military roster from 1947. Names, ranks, assignments, just the kind of thing you'd expect from a base handling classified operations. The mainstream story says these rosters are routine, nothing more than a snapshot of who was on duty. But then something doesn't add up. Matilda MacElroy's name appears, but not in any official Air Force archive. She's listed as a medical technician, yet her personnel file is missing from every database researchers have checked. That's not supposed to happen. So, was this a clerical error? Or did someone deliberately erase her records? Then there's the formatting. The roster uses European-style dates, day before month, which is out of place for American military paperwork from that era. And a few names on the list don't match any known service record. That's a red flag. Except some details are spot on. The roster includes officers who were definitely stationed at Roswell in July 1947, confirmed by declassified Air Force documents. Whoever made this list had access to real personnel data. But why mix real names with missing ones? One alternative. The roster was altered after the fact, blending authentic details with invented ones to support a larger story. If so, it's a careful forgery, one that would take serious research and access to obscure records. Here's a credibility anchor, military historian Richard Dolan, who's examined dozens of declassified rosters, says it's rare but not impossible for names to vanish from official lists, especially after a classified incident. Reality check. Skeptics argue that missing files are more likely due to clerical errors or lost paperwork than a cover-up. That's reasonable, but it doesn't explain the European date format or the odd mix of accurate and phantom names. So, was Matilda ever really there? Or is the roster itself a breadcrumb, left behind to send us chasing a ghost? The roster might be a breadcrumb, but the real rabbit hole started with the envelope itself. No return address, no postmark, just thick, weathered paper, sealed tight and left in Spencer's mailbox as if it had been hand-delivered. That's unusual. especially for documents that, if real, could start an international scandal. But let's look closer. The mainstream idea is simple. Anonymous tips are common in the UFO world, but most turn out to be hoaxes or misdirection. People crave mystery, and sometimes they'll manufacture it just to see who bites. Except, this envelope didn't come with a wild letter or a demand for attention. The note inside was almost clinical. You need to know the truth. The world is not what it seems. No signature, no threats, no instructions. That's not how hoaxers usually operate. Then, there's the paper itself. Lab analysis, documented in Spencer's own notes, suggested the pages were old, possibly from the 1940s or 50s. The ink had faded in a way consistent with age, not artificial aging. That's a credibility anchor. But here's the anomaly. The transcripts inside reference technology and ideas decades ahead of their time. Computer interfaces, planetary shields, even references to number stations, none of which would have made sense to a 1947 military typist. So, was the envelope a time capsule or a forgery using vintage materials? One alternative is that someone with access to old paper and a lot of UFO lore created these documents to muddy the waters, mixing fact and fiction until no one could tell the difference. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no chain of custody. No one saw the envelope delivered, and no independent lab has ever verified the age of the documents. That's a big gap. But if it's a forgery, it's an unusually sophisticated one. Most fakes get caught on the details, not the delivery. So, who had the motive and resources to pull this off? And if the envelope was meant to be found, what else is still out there, waiting in someone's mailbox? Telepathy. That's where the story takes a hard left turn. If someone really wanted these documents to be found, maybe it wasn't just about the paper trail. Maybe it was about the message, one that couldn't be sent by radio, phone, or even ink. Here's the thing. Matilda claimed she didn't just see the alien. She heard it, not with her ears, but in her mind. That's not standard military protocol. According to the transcripts, the being, Errol, never moved its lips. Instead, thoughts just appeared in Matilda's head. Images, feelings, entire histories, downloaded in seconds. She described it as telepathic visions, vivid enough to make her question her own sanity. But the mainstream explanation is simple. Stress, trauma, or suggestion can make people remember things that never happened. Military interrogations are intense, especially when you're isolated and under pressure. Except, the transcripts go way beyond typical hallucination. Matilda described star maps, ancient wars, and even the structure of the so-called prison shield around Earth. She detailed things she couldn't have known, at least not from any public source in 1947. So, if she was making it up, where did these details come from? One alternative is that Matilda was highly suggestible, maybe even hypnotized. But the transcripts show a consistency and complexity that's hard to fake under duress. Here's a credibility anchor. In 1947, Project Sign, the Air Force's first official UFO investigation, had just begun. Some of its early files mention reports of mental impressions during UFO encounters, though none as detailed as Matilda. Now, reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no corroborating evidence for telepathic communication. No witnesses, no physical proof. That's a big gap. But if Matilda's visions were just fantasy, why do they echo themes found in later, unrelated UFO reports? So, was this telepathy real, or just the product of a mind under unimaginable stress? And if these visions weren't hers alone, could someone else have received the same message? If telepathy was possible, what else could Matilda have learned from Errol? Here's where the transcripts take another wild turn. Errol didn't just talk about the past. She warned about the future. According to Matilda, Errol predicted a coming war, not between nations, but between hidden powers, fighting for control over Earth and its inhabitants. That's not your average alien encounter story. The mainstream view says predictions like this are classic science fiction, just recycled Cold War paranoia dressed up as cosmic prophecy. After all, 1947 was the dawn of the atomic age. Everyone was worried about secret wars, nuclear threats, and shadowy enemies. But Errol's warning was different. She described a silent conflict, fought not with bombs or bullets, but with ideas, technology, and control over human minds. According to the transcript, this war had been going on for millennia. Earth was just the latest battlefield. Then comes the anomaly. Errol supposedly gave details about old empire tactics, memory erasure, reincarnation traps, and a planetary shield that kept souls from escaping. She even hinted that certain world events, political upheavals, sudden cultural shifts, were skirmishes in this hidden war. That's a lot to swallow. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Matilda projected her own fears onto the alien, or maybe the transcripts were retroactively edited to fit later events. But if that's the case, why do some of Errol's predictions line up eerily well with real historical trends, like the sudden rise of mass media and psychological warfare? Here's a credibility anchor. In the 1950s, the CIA's Micheltrop program explored mind control and psychological manipulation. Those documents are real, and the parallels to Errol's warnings are hard to ignore. Reality check. The strongest objection is that none of Errol's predictions can be independently verified. There is no physical evidence, just Matilda's word. That's a serious problem. Still, the overlap with later declassified programs raises questions about where these ideas really came from. So, was Errol predicting a real war? One we're still fighting without knowing it? Or was this just another layer of the prison, designed to keep us guessing? If Errol's war is real, then the battlefield isn't just out there. It's inside our heads. But how could anyone, let alone an army nurse in 1947, handle information that big? Matilda claimed Errol wasn't just an alien with advanced tech. She called Errol an ISBE, an immortal spiritual being, using bodies like tools and slipping through time as easily as we change clothes. That's a leap. Mainstream thinking says consciousness is a byproduct of biology. Our memories, our sense of self, they're all tied to neurons firing in the brain. When the brain stops, so do we. Except Errol's story flips it upside down. According to the transcripts, humans aren't just flesh and blood. We're ISBEs too, trapped on Earth by a prison shield that wipes our memories every time we die. No past lives, no escape, just endless reincarnation with a blank slate. That's not how science sees it. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Matilda was describing a metaphor, her way of coping with trauma, or a story shaped by the science fiction she'd read. But then, there are details in the transcript that don't match anything published at the time. Words like interface, star maps, and planetary shield weren't mainstream in 1947. Here's a credibility anchor. The Air Force did experiment with memory manipulation, documented in declassified electroshock studies from the 1940s and 50s. The idea of erasing memories isn't just science fiction. Reality check. Critics say reincarnation and memory erasure have no support in biology or psychology. That's true. No peer-reviewed study has ever found evidence for souls trapped by planetary tech. Still, the persistence of these ideas in different cultures and their sudden appearance in these transcripts is hard to ignore. So, was Matilda channeling a mind beyond time, or just echoing the fears and fantasies of her era? And if our memories really are erased, how would we ever know? If our memories are wiped clean every lifetime, is it any wonder we can't remember the prison walls? That's exactly what Errol claimed the old empire was counting on. Mainstream historians say ancient empires controlled people with armies and propaganda, nothing more. The idea of a civilization spanning galaxies, using force and mind control, sounds like pure space opera. But the transcripts take it further. Errol described the old empire as a regime that ruled for millennia, not just over planets, but over souls themselves. Their secret weapon, a technology that could erase identity, rewrite memory, and trap spiritual beings in endless cycles of human life. That's not just mind control. It's cosmic lockdown. Except there's no evidence for any prison shield around Earth. No satellites, no force fields, nothing you could point a telescope at. The mainstream view says if something that massive existed, we'd have found it by now. So, what's the alternative? Maybe the shield isn't physical. Maybe it's psychological or even digital. A simulation so convincing that no one inside questions it. Here's where things get weirder. Matilda's transcripts mention number stations and planet circles projecting stars. Phrases that sound like gibberish. Except for one thing. Cold War intelligence agencies really did use number stations to send coded messages across the globe. That's a documented fact. But why would an alien talk about them in 1947? Errol also warned about dark watchers in the simulation. Entities monitoring souls, making sure the prison stays locked down. Now, that's straight out of science fiction, but it matches later stories from people claiming to experience missing time or surveillance by shadowy figures. Reality check. The strongest objection is that all of this sounds like recycled sci-fi and conspiracy theory. That's fair, but some details, like the use of number stations and memory erasure, showed up in real intelligence operations decades later. So, if the old empire's reach is real, is it hiding in plain sight? Or just hiding in our heads? And if Earth is a prison, who's really keeping watch? If Earth is a prison, then who controls the keys? And what's really out there beyond the bars? Here's the thing. Errol didn't just talk about Earth's trap. She described space itself as a dominion carved up and ruled by ancient powers. The old empire, she claimed, wasn't some distant myth. It was a regime that once dominated entire star systems, enforcing order with force and technology. That's a big claim. Mainstream science says space is empty, chaotic, and indifferent. The only empires are the ones we imagine in fiction. Star Wars, Dune. Take your pick. Real astronomers see no evidence of galactic overlords or cosmic boundaries. But Arrol's story doesn't care about telescopes. She described fleets, fortresses, and mind-control devices scattered across the galaxy. According to her, the old empire's grip was broken only after a rebellion, a war so massive it left scars on planets and wiped the memories of entire population. Except there's no physical trace of these battles. No ruins on Mars, no debris in orbit, nothing that matches the scale of what Arrow described. So what's the alternative? Maybe the Dominion isn't physical at all. Maybe it's about control of perception. An empire that rules by shaping what its subjects believe is possible. That's a different kind of power. Here's a credibility anchor. Ancient myths from cultures all over the world. Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, describe gods descending from the sky, wielding advanced technology and enforcing strict laws. Mainstream historians call this myth-making, but the parallels are hard to ignore. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's zero hard evidence for any galactic empire. No artifacts, no signals, nothing testable. That's true. But if the control is psychological or spiritual, maybe we wouldn't even recognize the evidence if we saw it. So who's really in charge? Some ancient force or our own collective imagination? And if the Dominion is real, what would it take to break free? If there's a Dominion out there, it isn't showing up on any radar. But the story keeps circling back to the same unsettling idea. Something, or someone, beyond Earth is pulling strings. Mainstream science says the universe is a vast, mostly empty place. Life might be out there, but no one's running the show. The laws of physics are the only real rulers. Except the transcripts hint at a different kind of order. Arrow described watchers, entities who don't just observe, but intervene. She claimed they shape events, nudge civilizations, and enforce the rules of this cosmic prison. According to her, most people would never notice. The system is invisible by design. That's a chilling thought. So, what's the alternative? Maybe these watchers are just metaphors for fate, luck, or the randomness of life. Or maybe they're projections, our own minds trying to make sense of chaos. But some details refuse to fit. There are reports, documented in declassified CIA files from the 1960s, of pilots and astronauts seeing unexplained objects, sometimes describing the feeling of being watched. Even number stations, those mysterious radio broadcasts, have been linked by some researchers to signals from elsewhere. Still, no hard proof. Here's the credibility anchor. In 1977, the WOW signal was detected by Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope. A strong, unexplained signal from space. Never repeated, never explained, but a signal isn't a message. Reality check. The strongest objection is that all these stories could be coincidence, misinterpretation, or wishful thinking. That's fair. But the persistence of the Watchers theme, across cultures, decades, and now buried in military transcripts, suggests something deeper at work. So, if there are forces beyond Earth, are they keeping us in, or keeping something else out? And if the Watchers are real, what happens if we finally see them? Earth's cage isn't made of bars, but of silence. If the Watchers are real, And if we ever notice them, what happens next? Is the world we know just a stage, with the exits hidden behind layers of distraction and routine? Mainstream science says there's nothing special about our planet. Earth is just one rock among billions, spinning through space with no evidence of a cosmic quarantine. But the transcripts claim otherwise. Errol described an invisible shield, a kind of spiritual firewall, trapping souls and erasing memories every time we die. No one remembers the last life, and no one escaped. The world feels normal because we're programmed to forget. Except people have reported flashes of déjà vu, strange dreams, or memories that don't fit their lives. So, is just the brain glitching out? Or is something deeper at work? One alternative is that the prison is psychological. Maybe culture, media, and even language are part of the cage, shaping what we believe is possible and keeping us from ever looking for an exit. But then, there are those who claim to have glimpsed the bars. Some near-death experiencers report seeing a barrier, light, static, or even voices, telling them to turn back. Others say they felt watched, as if someone or something was monitoring their every move. That's not easy to dismiss. Here's a credibility anchor. Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in the 1970s, documented hundreds of cases where people described hitting an invisible wall or being told they couldn't leave. Reality check. The strongest objection is that all of this can be explained by brain chemistry, oxygen deprivation, hallucinations, or cultural suggestion. That's a solid point, but the sheer number of similar stories across cultures and decades keeps the question open. So, is Earth's silence a natural state, or a warning not to look further? And if the cage is real, who holds the key? And what happens if someone finally breaks out? What if the silence isn't just emptiness, but a sign that something's blocking the signal? Here's the thing. Errol didn't just mention a prison. She described a shield, a kind of invisible net wrapped tight around Earth. According to the transcripts, this shield isn't made of metal or energy, but of frequency. Something that scrambles memories, blocks awareness, and bounces souls back like moths hitting glass. But if that's true, why hasn't anyone noticed? Mainstream science says there's no evidence of any force field around the planet. Satellites, astronauts, deep space probes. None of them have ever hit an invisible wall. Physics doesn't allow for a soul shield. Heck, there are anomalies. Some people report out-of-body experiences where they hit a barrier, an edge they can't cross, no matter how hard they try. Others describe dreams of trying to escape, only to be pulled back by a force they can't see. That's not just sleep paralysis. So, what's the alternative? Maybe the shield is psychological, a kind of mass hypnosis, reinforced by culture, media, and even language. If you're trained from birth to believe there's nothing outside, would you ever try to leave? But then, there are the number stations. Those eerie repeating radio signals, documented since the Cold War. Sometimes broadcast patterns that don't match any known code. Some researchers have speculated they're not just for spies, but for something or someone else. Now here's a credibility anchor. In 1973, Dr. Michael Persinger, a neuroscientist, studied the God helmet, a device that could induce sensations of an invisible presence or barrier just by stimulating the brain's temporal lobe. Reality check. The strongest objection is that all these experiences can be explained by brain chemistry, suggestion, or coincidence. That's valid, but it doesn't explain the consistency of the reports, or why so many people describe almost the same thing. So, if the shield is real, what's its purpose? Is it there to keep us in, or to keep something else out? And if someone ever finds a way through, what would they see on the other side? If someone broke through the shield, would they even remember what they saw? That's the twist Errol warned about. She claimed the shield doesn't just block escape. It wipes memories clean. Every time a soul tries to leave, everything it knows, every life, every secret gets erased. You start over, blank, with no clue where you've been or what you've lost. So you could break out and forget it ever happened. Mainstream science says memory is stored in the brain. When you die, the hardware goes offline. No brain, no memory, end of story. But here's the thing. People all over the world report flashes of past lives, déjà vu, or knowledge they can't explain. Except these cases are rare, and most can be chalked up to imagination or coincidence. Then there are the stories from children. Kids who remember places they've never been, or skills they never learned. Some of these have been investigated by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, who documented thousands of such cases. That's not just a fluke. So, if the shield wipes memories, how do these fragments slip through? One alternative, maybe the process isn't perfect. Maybe some souls slip past the firewall with a few scraps of memory intact. Or maybe the shield is weakening, and more people are starting to remember. But there's a catch. If you did remember, how would you prove it? Most of the world would call it a dream, a fantasy, or a glitch in the brain. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no scientific evidence for reincarnation or memory transfer between lives. That's true, and most cases fall apart under scrutiny. But the sheer number of similar stories, especially among young children, keeps the debate alive. So, is the shield failing? Or are we just better at noticing the cracks? And if someone finally remembers everything, what happens next? So, if someone could finally remember, really remember, what would they do with that knowledge? Errol claimed that's exactly what happened to her. She wasn't just a visitor passing through Earth's prison. According to the transcripts, Errol was on a mission, sent by a resistance group to break the cycle, recover what the prison system had destroyed, and maybe even help others escape. But here's the twist. Errol said she'd been trapped herself, caught, wiped, and forced to reincarnate as a human, just like everyone else. Except something went wrong. She started to remember. That's the anomaly. While most souls stayed blank, Errol's memories began leaking back. Visions of ancient wars, starships, and lost friends. She described a sense of purpose that never left, even when everything else was stripped away. So, was this just a coping mechanism for trauma? Or was something bigger at play? The mainstream explanation is that people under extreme stress sometimes invent elaborate backstories to make sense of their suffering. Psychologists call this confabulation, but Errol's story was detailed, consistent, and full of technical language that didn't exist in 1947. Then comes the alternative. Maybe Errol really was an Isby, an immortal being, sent on a mission, who managed to punch through the shield and remember who she was. Here's a credibility anchor. The transcripts mention Errol rebuilding something the prison had destroyed 8,000 years ago. That's oddly specific. And in ancient text, from Sumerian tablets to Egyptian carvings, there are references to restorers who come from the stars to repair what's been lost. But reality check. The strongest objection is that this sounds just like classic science fiction, or even the plot of a cult. That's fair. Still, the mix of ancient myth and military detail is hard to dismiss as pure fantasy. So, if Errol's mission was real, what did she restore? And if she succeeded, could others follow her lead? Or did she vanish, taking the secret with her? If Errol really did restore something lost 8,000 years ago, how did she do it, trapped in a human body, with memories wiped and no obvious tool? Here's the thing. Errol-claimed bodies are just vehicles, disposable. She said ispes, immortal spiritual beings, slip in and out of physical forms like drivers changing cars. The body isn't the person. It's just a tool for the mission. But that's not how most people see it. Mainstream science says consciousness comes from the body. The brain creates the mind, not the other way around. When the body dies, so does the cell. Except Errol's story flips that upside down. She described a process like logging into a computer. The Isbe chooses a body, uses it to interact with the world, then leaves when the job's done, or when something goes wrong. So, if bodies are just tools, what's the real mission? Errol claimed she was sent here to repair what the prison system destroyed. Knowledge, freedom, and the ability to remember who we really are. But every time she got close, the system fought back. Memory wipes, forced reincarnation, constant surveillance. That's not just a metaphor. It's a battle for identity. Now, here's the anomaly. The transcripts use the word interface to describe the connection between Isbe and body, a term decades ahead of its time. In 1947, nobody talked about interfaces outside a handful of engineers. But there's an alternative explanation. Maybe Errol's story is just a metaphor for dissociation or trauma. People sometimes describe feeling detached from their bodies under stress. Still, here's a credibility anchor. Dr. Sam Parnia, a leading researcher in near-death experiences, has documented cases where people report observing their own bodies from above, describing details they shouldn't have known. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no scientific proof that consciousness can exist outside the body. That's true. But the persistence of these reports across cultures and decades keeps the debate alive. So, if bodies are just tools, could anyone learn to drive them on purpose? And if Errol figured out how, is that the secret she took with her? Or left behind for someone else to find? Most people think reincarnation is a spiritual comfort, a nice story about second chances. But Errol's version is anything but comforting. She said the cycle isn't a gift, it's a trap. Every time a soul dies, it's yanked back, memories scrubbed, dropped into a new body with no clue what came before. That's not reincarnation. That's reset. Mainstream science says there's no evidence for souls or past life. Consciousness, they argue, is a byproduct of the brain. When the brain dies, so does the cell. Except thousands of people around the world report memories, skills, or traumas that don't fit their lives. Some kids can describe places they've never seen, or recall details from eras they couldn't possibly know. So, what's really happening? If Errol's right, then reincarnation isn't evolution, it's containment. The shield wipes the slate, but sometimes cracks appear. That's when strange memories leak through, or people feel like they're not really from here. But here's the anomaly. The transcripts don't just talk about souls coming back. They describe a system, a recycling center that captures ISBs, erases them, and spits them back into new bodies. That's not your grandma's afterlife. So, what's the alternative? Maybe these memories are just the brain playing tricks. False memories, wishful thinking, or stories picked up from parents and media. However, some cases go beyond coincidence. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, spent decades documenting children who recalled specific, verifiable details about past lives, names, places, even causes of death. That's a credibility anchor. Reality check. The strongest objection is that these stories can be explained by suggestion, cultural influence, or pure chance. That's a solid point. But the sheer volume and consistency of these cases, across cultures and time, make them hard to dismiss entirely. So, if the prison system is real, and reincarnation is forced, is there a way to break the cycle? Or are we all just passengers on a cosmic carousel, riding in circles and never getting off? But what if some souls never even got the chance to ride the carousel in the first place? That's where the Lost Battalion comes in. According to Arrow, Earth's prison system didn't just trap random individuals. It captured entire groups. The Lost Battalion was a squadron of officers from an ancient interstellar war, caught by the old empire, stripped of their identities, and forced to reincarnate as human. Now, that's not in any history book. Mainstream historians say battalions get lost in battle, not in time. They talk about missing soldiers, not missing souls. The idea that a whole team could be wiped, rebooted, and scattered across generations. That's pure science fiction. Except Arrow claimed she met some of them. She said these souls had flashes of memory, dreams of battlefields that didn't exist on Earth, instincts that didn't match their lives, and a constant sense of being out of place. But here's the anomaly. Some people have reported recurring dreams of wars in strange landscapes, or a longing for home that isn't anywhere on this planet. Psychologists usually call this fantasy-prone personality or cryptomnesia, memories built from books, movies, or stories overheard as children. So, what if it's not just fantasy? Errol described efforts to help the Lost Battalion remember who they were, using telepathy, meditation, even coded messages hidden in art and music. She claimed the prison system fought back, erasing progress and keeping the cycle going. That sounds like a battle for consciousness itself. But there's an alternative explanation. Maybe these people are just looking for meaning. And the idea of being a lost soul from another world is more exciting than facing ordinary life. Here's a credibility anchor. In 2007, psychologist Dr. Jim Tucker published cases of children who recalled lives as soldiers in wars they couldn't have known about. Some details later matched to real, obscure battles. Reality check. The strongest objection is that these stories could be coincidence, suggestion, or even wishful thinking. That's fair, but it doesn't explain the persistence of the theme. or why so many people feel the same strange pull. So, if the lost battalion is real, are they waking up? Or is the prison system still one step ahead, wiping the slate before anyone remembers the truth? If the lost battalion is out there, what does it mean to be captured and reborn, over and over, with no memory of who you are? Here's where the story gets even stranger. Errol claimed that when these souls were caught, they weren't just erased, they were recycled, forced into new bodies, new families, new lives, all across Earth's timeline. Each time, the slate wiped clean, but sometimes things slip through. A face in a dream, a sudden fear of places you've never seen, skills you never learned. Now the mainstream explanation is simple. Past life memories are just imagination, or maybe stories picked up subconsciously from books, movies, or family tales. Psychologists call it cryptomnesia, remembering something you never actually experienced. Except there are cases that don't fit. Some people report memories with details that check out. Names, locations, even obscure historical facts that later prove accurate. That's not easy to explain away. So, what's the alternative? Maybe the prison system isn't perfect. Maybe, under the right conditions, fragments of the old self break through. Meditation, trauma, or even just a random trigger could open the door. But then, why aren't more people waking up? Errol suggested the system adapts. When someone starts to remember, the shield kicks in harder. More memory wipes, more confusion, more distraction. That's a chilling thought. Here's a credibility anchor. Dr. Ian Stevenson's research at the University of Virginia documented over 2,500 cases of children who recalled specific, verifiable details from previous lives, sometimes as soldiers, sometimes as victims, sometimes as people lost in war. Reality check. The strongest objection is that these cases are statistical flukes, or the result of suggestion and coincidence. That's a fair point, but it doesn't explain the consistency or the emotional intensity of the memories. So, are the Lost Battalion and others like them starting to break free? Or is the prison system evolving, always one step ahead, ready to erase the truth before it can spread? And if someone finally remembers everything, what happens to the cycle then? So what happens if someone finally remembers everything? Does the cycle break? Or does the system just hit reset harder than ever? That's the heart of Errol's warning. She said the prison system relies on one thing above all: memory erasure. Every time a soul leaves a body, the shield scrubs it clean. Not just memories of the last life, but any trace of who or what you ever were. It's not just forgetting. It's enforced amnesia. But here's the thing. Sometimes cracks appear. People wake up from surgery, speaking a new language. Kids recall lives on the other side of the world. Soldiers have flashbacks to battles that never happened in any history book. That's not supposed to be possible. So, if memory erasure is so effective, why do these cases slip through? One alternative is that the shield isn't perfect. Trauma, meditation, or even a glitch in the system might let fragments leak back. Or maybe, as Errol hinted, the cycle is breaking down under its own weight. Except the mainstream explanation is much simpler. Psychologists say these are just false memories, products of suggestion, stress, or a mind desperate to make sense of chaos. But you hit an anomaly. Some memories come with details that can be checked. Names, dates, even obscure events that line up with real history. That's not easy to fake, especially for young children. Here's a credibility anchor. Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia has documented hundreds of these cases, some with facts the child couldn't have learned any other way. Reality check. The strongest objection is that these are just coincidences, or the result of parents unintentionally feeding information. That's a fair point, but it doesn't explain the consistency across cultures and decades. So, if the system is slipping, what happens when someone remembers too much? Does the prison fight back, or does it finally let go? And if the shield fails, what's waiting on the other side? If the shield fails, what's left behind? Errol's story suggests the answer isn't just freedom. It's something rebuilt, something left behind for the next soul to find. Here's the thing. According to the transcripts, Errol didn't just escape the prison's grip. She repaired a piece of knowledge the system had destroyed 8,000 years ago. Not a weapon, not a machine, but a legacy. But what does that even mean? Mainstream thinking says history is a straight line. Civilizations rise, fall, and leave their mark in stone, language, or myth. When knowledge is lost, it's usually buried under rubble or rewritten by the victors. Except Errol claimed this lost legacy wasn't physical at all. She described it as a kind of blueprint, an idea or memory structure, hidden deep in the collective unconscious. Not something you could dig up, but something you could remember if you knew where to look. That's not how archaeology works. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Errol's rebuilding was a metaphor for rediscovering ancient wisdom, something buried in myth, ritual, or even DNA. Or maybe it was a real process, a way to restore abilities or knowledge the prison system tried to erase. But here's the anomaly. After her supposed breakthrough, the transcripts mention a sudden shift. Matilda's demeanor changed. Her memories became clearer, and she started talking about things she'd never studied. That's not your average psychological recovery. Now, here's a credibility anchor. In the 1970s, psychologist Carl Jung wrote about the collective unconscious, shared memories and archetypes that surface across cultures and eras. Some researchers believe ancient knowledge can resurface in dreams, art, or sudden inspiration. Reality check. The strongest objection is that this is just wishful thinking. People see patterns in chaos, and legends about lost wisdom are everywhere. That's fair, but it doesn't explain the sudden leaps in insight, or why these patterns repeat in stories from around the world. So, if Errol really rebuilt a lost legacy, what did she leave behind for us? And if someone else stumbles across it, will they even recognize what they've found? But here's a detail that refuses to fade into the background. The word computer. Errol's transcripts, supposedly from 1947, mention using a computer interface to process information and communicate ideas. That's not just odd, it's almost impossible. At the time, computer meant a person who did math, not a machine. The first electronic computers were top secret, room-sized monsters, and the term interface wouldn't become common for another 2 decades. So, how did it end up in a document from the Roswell era? Mainstream historians say this is a dead giveaway. Any document using computer interface in 1947 is either a fake or heavily edited after the fact. The language just doesn't fit. Except the transcripts don't just drop the word once. They use it naturally, as if the author was familiar with the concept. Errol describes downloading and uploading memories, connecting to systems, even describing the body as a kind of biological terminal. That's not 1940s thinking. So, what's the alternative? Maybe whoever created the transcript was projecting modern ideas backward, either by accident or design. Or maybe Errol's story, if true, really did involve technology so advanced it sounded like science fiction to everyone else. But then there's a weird credibility anchor. In 1946, the ENIAC computer went operational at the University of Pennsylvania. It was secret, massive, and mostly unknown to the public. Only a handful of military insiders even knew what it could do. Still, interface wasn't in their vocabulary. Reality check. The strongest objection is that the language proves these transcripts are a modern forgery. That's a powerful argument. But then, why are there other details? Military jargon, obscure base procedures that line up perfectly with 1947 documentation. So, was this just sloppy editing? Or did someone have access to knowledge decades ahead of its time? And if Errol really left a legacy hidden in the language, what else is hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice? If there's a code in the language, who would want to erase it? And how far would they go? Here's the thing. The transcripts claim that after Matilda's final interview with Errol, things got tense. Military brass, already on edge, decided she'd seen too much. The official story. Standard debrief. Nothing unusual. But that's not what Matilda remembered. She described being strapped down, surrounded by doctors and officers. The next thing she knew, a jolt of electricity hit her skull. Electroshock therapy, supposedly for her own good. Except this wasn't about therapy. It was about erasure. The mainstream idea is that electroshock was used in the 1940s for severe mental illness, depression, psychosis, trauma. Doctors believed it could reset the brain, sometimes with dramatic results. But in Matilda's case, it wasn't about healing. It was about making her forget. So what's the anomaly? The transcripts say the electroshock wasn't just a medical procedure. It was a weapon, not just to erase trauma, but to wipe out everything she'd learned from Errol. Memories, knowledge, even her sense of self. That's a chilling claim. Now, here's an alternative. Maybe Matilda's memories of electroshock were exaggerated, or even invented, after years of stress and isolation. But the details match documented procedures used at military hospitals in the late 1940s. There's your credibility anchor. In 1946, the U.S. Army's own medical manuals described electroshock as a way to disrupt persistent delusional memories. And by the 1950s, the CIA's MKUltra program was testing shock and drugs to erase inconvenient minds. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no proof the military used shock to erase alien contact memories. That's fair. But the history of psychological experiments on unwilling subjects is well documented. The line between therapy and control was thin. So, if Matilda's mind was wiped, what fragments survived? Did the shock erase everything? Or did something slip through the cracks? And if it did, where did those memories end up? So if Matilda's mind was wiped, What was left of her? Did the shock erase her identity, or just bury it deeper? Here's where things get even murkier. After the alleged treatment, Matilda vanished from all official records. No discharge papers, no forwarding address, just a blank space where a person used to be. The mainstream view? She was a low-level nurse who faded into civilian life, forgotten by history. But there's a catch. No one ever found a trace of her. No marriage license, no obituary, not even a tax record. It's as if she never existed outside those transcripts. Except there are hints. A few years later, a woman matching her description appeared in the Southwest, using a different name, working odd jobs, and keeping to herself. She told neighbors she was just passing through and never stayed long. That's not normal for someone with a stable government job. So, was this Matilda running from something or someone? Or was it just a coincidence, another lost soul drifting through post-war America? Then there's the anomaly in the documents themselves. Her writing style changed after the interviews. Before, her notes were clipped and clinical. After, they became almost philosophical, questioning reality, identity, and the nature of memory itself. It's as if she was searching for herself on the page. One alternative is that the trauma of the experience fractured her identity, leaving her with gaps she could never fill. But another possibility: fragments of Arrow's knowledge survived the shock, hidden in dreams or flashes of intuition. Here's a credibility anchor. In 1952, a psychiatrist at a New Mexico VA hospital documented a patient with persistent amnesia and elaborate memories of non-terrestrial origin. The file was sealed, but the timing and location match Matilda's last known whereabouts. Reality check. The strongest objection is that Matilda might never have existed at all. The name could be a pseudonym, a composite, or a total fabrication. That's possible, but the strange gaps in the record and the matching patient file suggest something was being covered up. So, who was Matilda after the shock? Was she just a casualty of a forgotten experiment? Or did she carry hidden memories that could change everything? And if she did, could anyone ever find her now? If Matilda vanished with her memories scrambled, what did she leave behind? The answer might be hidden in the so-called alien transcript, the very pages that started the whole mystery. Here's the thing. The transcript is nothing like a standard military report. It reads more like a coded diary, full of technical language, strange metaphors, and warnings that don't fit any known protocol. There are whole sections where Matilda seems to be channeling Arrow directly, describing star maps, energy grids, and the mechanics of the soul. But then, there are the contradictions. She uses words like interface and download decades before computers became household terms. The transcript even references simulation and frequency barriers, concepts that wouldn't hit mainstream science or pop culture until much later. That's not just ahead of its time. It's almost prophetic. So, what's the mainstream idea? Most researchers say the transcript is a modern fake, written by someone with just enough military jargon to sound plausible. They point to the language, the formatting, and the sci-fi themes as proof it's a hoax. Except, some details are hard to dismiss. The transcript contains names, dates, and base procedures that check out with declassified Roswell records. There are references to real officers, actual flight schedules, and even security protocols that weren't public knowledge until years after the supposed interview. That's a problem for the forgery theory. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Matilda really did have access to something, or someone, outside the normal chain of command. Or maybe the transcript was edited, blending real details with fiction to create a story no one could fully verify or debunk. Here's a credibility anchor. In 2007, Lawrence Spencer claimed he only edited the transcript, not wrote it, and destroyed the originals out of fear. He stuck to that story, even when pressed by skeptics and researchers. Reality check. The strongest objection is that there's no chain of custody, no physical evidence, and no independent witness. That's a serious hole. But it doesn't explain the uncanny accuracy of certain details, or why the transcript lines up with classified info from the era. So, was the alien transcript a genuine record of contact, or a carefully constructed puzzle meant to keep us guessing? And if it's a puzzle, what happens if someone finally cracks the code? A name can disappear faster than a secret. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, once at the center of the Roswell storm, seems to have been erased from history. No birth certificate, no service record, not even a trace in the census. It's as if the moment the interview stopped, so did she. But here's the thing. Her name is everywhere in the transcript. She signs off on reports, files memos, and even references other base staff, people who can be tracked in official rosters. Except every time someone tries to verify her, they hit a dead end. That's not just a missing file, it's a vanishing act. So, what's the mainstream explanation? The Air Force never listed a Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy at Roswell. Skeptics say she's a fiction, maybe a pseudonym, maybe a composite, maybe just a placeholder for a story that never happened. However, there's an anomaly. Some details in the transcript match real events and personnel. The language, the procedures, even the way she describes the base's daily grind. These line up with declassified records from 1947. Whoever wrote this knew the inside of Roswell. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Matilda was a real person, assigned under a different name. Or maybe she was hidden on purpose. If the military wanted to erase her, they had the tools and the motive. Here's a credibility anchor. In 2002, a FOIA request uncovered a handful of redacted nurse assignments at Roswell, with names blacked out and reasons listed as classified. That's not proof, but it's not nothing. Reality check. The strongest objection is that no one has ever found a single uncontested document linking Matilda to the base. That's a big hole. But classified projects often leave behind gaps, and people have vanished from the record before. So, if Matilda's name was wiped, what else was erased along with her? And if someone finds the missing link, will it reveal a person? Or just another layer of the puzzle? But here's the real twist. Sometimes, the harder you look for answers, the more the story slips through your fingers. If Matilda's name was wiped, what else vanished with her? Was it just a single nurse, or an entire chapter of history quietly erased? Mainstream historians say the Roswell incident is a closed case. Weather balloons, military confusion, and a public hungry for mystery. Everything else is just noise. Except the anomalies keep stacking up. You've got transcripts using language a decade ahead of its time, real officers and procedures mixed with names that don't exist anywhere else, and a nurse who seems to have been erased more thoroughly than any classified project. So, what's the alternative? Maybe Matilda was a ghost in the system, A real person hidden under layers of security, or a stand-in for someone who couldn't risk being named. Or maybe the whole transcript is a carefully built myth, designed to keep us chasing shadows. But then, there's the credibility anchor. Those redacted nurse assignments at Roswell, found in a 2002 FOIA request, prove that not every name was meant to be found. Sometimes, the government really does make people disappear. So, what's the final question? Is Matilda proof of a cover-up, or just a symbol of how easily truth gets lost? Reality check. The strongest objection is that no one has produced a single verified document tying Matilda to Roswell. That's a gaping hole. But total erasure is exactly what you'd expect from a story built on secrets. And it doesn't explain the matching details buried in the transcript. So, if someone ever finds the missing link, will it finally reveal the real Matilda? Or will it just open another door, leading deeper into the maze? Truth doesn't just hide in the shadows. It thrives there. Every time someone gets close to the real Matilda, the trail splits. One path leads to dead ends and redacted files. The other wins into stranger territory, anonymous letters, destroyed documents, and stories that sound too wild to be true. But here's the thing. Every official answer just raises more questions. Mainstream researchers say the simplest explanation is the right one. Roswell was a military project gone sideways. Matilda never existed, and all that's left is a pile of hoaxes and wishful thinking. Except the details keep leaking through. Why does the transcript mix real names and base routines with terms no one used in 1947? Why did someone go to the trouble of destroying the originals, then risk everything to send copies to a random editor decades later? Then there's the alternative. Maybe the story was built to be unsolvable, a blend of fact and fiction, designed to keep everyone guessing, and to keep the real truth hidden in plain sight. It's a classic magician's trick. Now, watch what happens next. Every time the story seems to settle, a new anomaly pops up. European date, formats in American files, references to future technology, hints that someone, somewhere, knew more than they were supposed to. So, who benefits from keeping the truth in the shadows? Here's a credibility anchor. In 1994, the General Accounting Office admitted that hundreds of pages of Roswell records were unaccountably missing. Not lost, not misfiled, just gone. But reality check. The strongest objection is that missing files are common in old government archives. Sometimes things just get lost. That's true, but not every missing file sparks a decades-long hunt for a woman who might not exist. So, are we chasing a ghost, or is there something real hiding just out of reach? And if the truth is in the shadows, what happens if someone finally shines a light? Maybe the truth isn't hiding, it's just moving. Always one step ahead. Every time someone gets close, the story shifts. A new witness, a missing file, a detail that doesn't fit. It's like chasing a shadow that dances just out of reach. But here's the thing. Sometimes the shadow moves because someone's pushing it. Mainstream researchers say the Roswell story is just a mass hallucination. People want to believe, so they fill in the blanks with whatever fits their hopes or fears. The official story is weather balloons and Cold War paranoia, nothing more. Except The anomalies keep piling up. A nurse who vanishes from every record. Transcripts that use language decades ahead of their time. Real military routines mixed with impossible sci-fi concepts. That's not an accident. So, what if the story is designed to be unsolvable? Maybe the truth is buried under so many layers of fiction and fact that no one can tell where one ends and the other begins. Then again, maybe someone wants it that way. There's a credibility anchor here. In 1994, the General Accounting Office admitted to unaccountably missing Roswell records. Not lost in a warehouse, not misfiled, just gone with no explanation. But the real question is, who benefits from keeping the story muddy? Now, reality check. The strongest objection is that missing files and conflicting stories are just the result of bureaucracy and human error. That's fair. Governments lose paperwork all the time. But it doesn't explain why the details that survive are so strange, or why the trail always leads to another locked door. So, are we following a real mystery, or just dancing to someone else's tune? And if someone finally shines a light on the truth, will it reveal a secret, or just another shadow?